Welcome inside the CitrusTV studios for a web edition of Cuse Countdown. Alongside Matt Liberman and Drew Carter, I'm Marco Socci. Guys, Syracuse, they've got UConn this week, coming off two bad home losses to Louisville and USF. Is it time to worry about this team?
Marco, I think it is time to worry just a little bit, but you have to keep it in perspective. Syracuse was taking on two juggernaut opponents in Louisville and South Florida. We saw what the Cardinals did to a top 5 team in Florida State, and South Florida is very good as well. So don't hit the panic button just yet.
I would definitely have to agree with you. Playing Louisville, you have right now the Heisman frontrunner that you're playing against. He absolutely torched the SU offense. Again, USF, a very good team. Obviously, they were able to handle things against Colgate, FCS team, but I would be worried about things moving forward.
Guys, you guys might be worried. Coach Babers, on the other hand, not so worried. He says just a few bad habits to break.
You know, it's I don't want to put anything back on them, but it just has to do with habits. There's obviously, when you look at the games, there's stretches where guys are doing it exactly right, and then all of a sudden they have a flashback. And then you're sitting there going, hey, you just did it right 3 times in a row. Why did you do it wrong the 4th time? And it's like, oh, Coach, I don't know. Well, that I don't know is that they're used to doing it a certain way, and we've got to get them out of the old way and get them into the new way. We're in the beginning stages because of where we started from. I said that out of all the places I've been, this is going to be the toughest transition I've ever had, because of what was taught previously before we got here. It does not mean that what they were teaching was wrong. It just means that that was the Z, and we're operating from the A side of the alphabet. It's a huge transition. So as we grow together, we'll get better and better at it.
So you heard it right there. Coach Babers says he's going through a transition. It's his toughest transition yet. How much time do you guys give him to go through with this transition until, losses like Louisville and USF start becoming completely unacceptable?
Marco, I think you got to give him at least a year just to get some of his recruits in, because it is really an enormous shift in philosophy for the Syracuse team. Scott Schaefer recruited for his blitz-heavy, havoc-wreaking, aggressive defense, and now Dino Babers comes in and runs a Tampa 2, much more conservative, and they don't blitz nearly as much. So you need to recruit for your own system, and the personnel will start to fit that scheme as Dino Babers gets more time at Syracuse.
I would say that you even have to give it 2 years. I think you really have to phase out the personnel that Scott Schaefer brought in right now. Again, like you said with the Tampa 2, he has to adjust the style of the game in order to fit the players that he has now. If you give it 2 years, he can change the players, he can go after certain prospects, and offensively we see the struggles, and so I think that that's the key. You give him 2 years, he brings in his own players, and I think we'll be good.
And it's appropriate that you guys went to defense. Let's take a look at just how bad that defense has been, especially in the last 2 games. I mean, you see it right here. That first game, they hold Colgate to 7 points after the Raiders scored on the first drive of the game, but the last 2 games, it's been pretty bad. 62 points to Louisville, maybe understand that after what they did to Florida State, but 45 against USF, just too much.
Right, and if you want to ask what the biggest problem is about the Syracuse defense, my response would be, how much time do we have? Because there are a lot of issues for the Orange. Namely, I think it's what we just talked about, though, Matt. It's the issue that Scott Schaefer recruited guys for his system, and now they're being thrown into the fire of a new Dino Babers scheme. Orange giving up 650 yards per game against FBS opponents. That's the worst number in the country. It's got to come down at some point.
I would have to agree with you. Again, you're facing a quarterback of Lamar Jackson, and things obviously aren't going to go your way there.
Guys, keeping it with the SU defense, some questions to ask you guys. Number 1, can SU stop dual threat quarterbacks? This week they've got a dual threat quarterback at UConn and Bryant Sheriffs. He's very good. He's going to be the key to the game, I think. So, is it possible? Now, you've played Louisville, you've played USF. Did they learn something from those games?
Well, if you're a Syracuse fan, you'd certainly hope so, because those guys just torched the Orange defense. Now, Bryant Sheriffs for UConn, he's not really a Heisman contender like Lamar Jackson certainly is, and he's not even as good as Quentin Flowers is. But they really had no chance against those dual-threat quarterbacks, especially when they ran the read option. And I think it comes down to the Syracuse defensive ends, a freshman in Kendall Coleman, and on the other side, Chris Slayton. Neither one of those guys has much experience, especially defending a play like that. As they get a little bit older and get some more experience in the scheme, I think things will start to come around.
I think that they will do a good job of containing Sheriffs. When you look at some of the competition that UConn has played thus far, they've played the University of Maine, they've played Navy. These have not been good teams, and yes, Sheriffs has been the leading rusher for UConn against those teams, but again, Syracuse is a much more capable opponent than they are, and yes, Syracuse's defense has been awful so far, but the caliber of play is much different this week for UConn.
Last week, other than the bad performance on defense, Syracuse lost Antoine Cordy and Jawan Dowles in the secondary, 2 big players for them. Matt, we'll start with you this time. How big are those injuries?
Those injuries are huge, Marco. I mean, when you look at a defense that is already one of the worst in the country and they are already deflated, you have to look at the options that you have left. And for Syracuse right now, there aren't many. When you look at the loss of those two guys, again, with the new style with the Tampa 2, you're trying to get these starters to adjust as fast as possible. When you lose two of those starters, that's so much more of a burden on your team that you have to adjust with now.
And the secondary was already getting torched a couple of times per game. You know, most notably on the first play of the contest against Louisville, Antoine Cordy got scorched for 72 yards and a touchdown. Now, he was Syracuse's best defensive back, and now he's injured. It's going to be tough to see. We've already talked about their run defense problems. The pass defense is going to struggle as well if they can't cover anyone.
Last question for you guys on the defense. We've talked a lot about Tampa 2. You guys brought it up. It's a bit of an outdated style of defense. Does the Tampa 2 work?
Well, not when you don't have the personnel for it, Marco, and right now Syracuse certainly does not. We've already talked about how Scott Schaefer recruited for his system, and Dino Babers is struggling to transfer that personnel to his own system. And with the Tampa 2, you rely on your defensive ends to generate pressure by themselves. You don't call a lot of blitzes, and you rely on guys to drop seven deep and defend the pass that way. When you don't get pressure on guys like Lamar Jackson and Quinton Flowers, they're going to kill you, and Syracuse has to maybe change something to help get pressure in the pocket.
The Tampa 2 is based on pure physicality, and right now, SU has none of that. They have injuries, they have a deflated defense, and when you look, you need speed for the Tampa 2. It starts with the defensive ends, but you also need impressive speed from the defensive backs, and right now, they do not have that. Once they get the physicality, the strength, and the speed for Babers' program, and when he is able to seek those proper recruits, things, I think, will start to change, but until he can get that, we don't see the physicality, and we don't see a successful Tampa 2.
Well, it's just about time to take a look at our keys for the game. Drew, we'll start with you. What's your key to this game?
Marco, you said it a couple minutes ago. It's UConn quarterback Brian Sheriffs. He's the team's leading rusher heading into this game with over 200 yards on the game, on the season, excuse me. And now, again, we know he's not Lamar Jackson and he's not Quinton Flowers, but he is dangerous with the ball in his hands. They run a little bit of the read option, and that's been Syracuse's biggest Achilles heel. So if they can contain Sheriffs on the ground, they'll have a better chance to win.
My key to the game has to be the Syracuse offensive line. Syracuse right now ranks 111th in the country in yards per carry with only 3.4. You take away a Mo Neal 49-yard touchdown run, and he's averaging 2.7 yards per carry. That's absolutely pitiful. Against a UConn defense, I hope that the offensive line can improve. Obviously, Louisville, incredible team, but the offensive line really needs to improve, and Syracuse needs to get its run game going.
Well, Matt, you mentioned the offensive line. It's prediction time now. Do you think that offensive line holds up, and what's your final score?
I think the offensive line will hold up. Again, like I said before, UConn has not played against good teams. They lost to Navy on Navy's fourth-string quarterback. I think that finally UConn will face proper caliber team. I think that Syracuse comes out on top 28-13 in this one.
And Matt, you said UConn has had a bit of a soft schedule. Syracuse has been the exact opposite against Louisville, who we now know is a top-5 team, in South Florida, who probably should be ranked themselves. I think against a team like UConn, more of a mediocre opponent, Syracuse squeaks out with a win, 27-24.
Well, there you hear it. Both of you going on the positive this week. Syracuse getting back to 500, according to you guys, and I'm sure the Orange fans hope you guys are right in this one. For Matt Liberman and Drew Carter, I'm Marco Socci. Have a good night.